Alright, today we're going to go over chapter 11.2, the complex patterns of inheritance, which is beyond what Mendel had explained to us about dominant versus recessive. So this is just an extenuation of our understanding of genetics. So this is just a little extra. So bear with me and check it out. It's pretty interesting. So our objectives are to distinguish between various complex inheritance patterns, analyze sex-linked and sex-limited inheritance patterns, and explain how the environment itself can influence the phenotype of an organism. And remember, phenotype is the physical appearance of an organism. So discussing how the environment can affect what you look like. Main idea: complex inheritance of traits does not follow the inheritance patterns described by Mendel. So like I said, everything we've learned about the basics of genetics, that was what Mendel came up with in his pea plant experiments. Now we're going to go on beyond what he had actually known about or learned about. So this is something extra. These are some of the unexplained cases or phenomenons in the genetic world. So they were later explained through a deeper understanding of genes and chromosomes and all that good stuff. So let's take a look and see what it is. So beyond the dominant and recessive, dominant is not always dominant and recessive is not always recessive. There are two different types of cases out there, one of which is called the case of incomplete dominance, where heterozygous phenotypes, so if you are heterozygous, so for example if you had a dominant trait and a recessive trait, which technically are not dominant nor are they recessive, but if you had two different traits from two different parents, right? The phenotype is an intermediate between the dominant and the recessive trait. Okay, so think about that. If you had, say, a blue zebra and a yellow zebra, and they mated together and they had offspring, what color might the offspring be if it's an intermediate? So keep in mind, they're not going to be blue and they're not going to be yellow. It's an intermediate. What color would they be? Green. Okay, so they're a blend of the two. So an intermediate. Cases of codominance. Now this is another case where both dominant and recessive alleles are represented equally in heterozygous individuals. So in this case, if you had a zebra that had blue stripes and you had a zebra with yellow stripes and they were to produce offspring, what would the baby zebra look like? You would find that the baby zebra would have an equal number of blue and yellow stripes. Not green, blue and yellow, because they're both represented equally within the individual. Okay? So make sure you note the difference between incomplete dominance and codominance. Incomplete is a blending, co is when they both coexist together. So here's a case of incomplete dominance, such as in snapdragons or roses. As you can see from the Punnett square below, you have a red flower and you have a white flower. All right? They are both purebred red and purebred white. When you mix them together, you produce an intermediate, a pink flower. Very common. Okay? So notice the genotype of the individuals right here for the pink flowers. Okay, there's C big R and C big W. So this is how we kind of represent these unique cases within the genetic world. It's not just one letter, it's actually two letters, but one is superscripted. Okay, now what they wanted to do was they wanted to cross two pink flowers. So if you cross two pink flowers, what would you get? More pink flowers? Not exactly, right? You'll get some pink flowers, as you can see here. So 50% of them will be pink. But then you'll have 25% that are red and 25% that are white, based upon how it works out. Because as you bring down the red allele for both of them, you're going to get that. As you bring the red allele across with the white allele, you get your pink again. So once again, red down, white across, pink. But then when you have both whites come across, you get a white flower. Okay? So this is a case of incomplete dominance. So some of you may have these particular traits. So you're like, well, I don't have a trait quite like my mom's or my dad's. Well, sometimes the trait can be blended together in incomplete dominance. So it's not that you necessarily have to have one or the other. Sometimes you just get a blend. Alright, so here is a classic case of codominance. And you might have heard of this one before. Sickle cell anemia. It affects your red blood cells and their ability to transport oxygen throughout the entire body to all your individual cells. And we know we need oxygen to do cellular respiration. Without that, your muscles are going to start to build up lactic acid, you're going to have soreness, and if you don't get any oxygen, they could eventually die. So this can be very serious, sickle cell anemia. It results from a change in the protein structure. So, when we talked about transcription and translation, a mutation has occurred in these individuals, or in an individual long ago, that caused this gene to occur. That one nucleotide that was changed in the DNA resulted in a different amino acid. That one different amino acid changed the polypeptide chain that was produced through translation. When that polypeptide chain folded, it didn't fold the same way. And as a result, it caused a conformational change in the protein structure of your red blood cells, causing them to instead look like, instead of a round donut, to look more like this sickle shape that we see over here on the lower right. Okay? So, due to the odd-shaped red blood cells, it can block or inhibit blood flow in small vessels, so they can start to clot up in small little capillaries and stuff like that, which is not good. All right? Heterozygous individuals produce both types of red blood cells. So, if you are homozygous recessive for sickle cell anemia, you have some serious issues that you need to watch out for in life. If you're heterozygous, you can still live a pretty good life, but you need to be cautious of this and take note of this, and be aware of your condition, because it could be life-threatening at times. All right, so there's things that you need to be aware of if you do have this trait, or if your family has this trait and you could potentially pass it on. All right. You might be thinking to yourself, I don't really know anybody with sickle cell anemia. Well, sickle cell anemia is not necessarily super predominant in North America, but there are some continents that it is predominant on, such as Africa. And the reason why it is heavily concentrated in the continent of Africa is because those individuals that have the sickle cell trait also are somewhat immune to malaria, which is a pathogen people can contract from mosquitoes and cause death. So if you have the ability to overcome this, you can potentially live longer and pass on your genes to your children. So that's a plus at the same time. So this gene has been accumulating over time in these regions because the higher cases of malaria in those areas as well. Okay? So overall, you can tell from the map that there are several countries, specifically those in red, that are developing high amounts of individuals with the sickle cell trait because of the malaria. So yes, it can be life-threatening, but it can also save your life. So some mutations can be good and some can be bad, kind of like that EOC question we had. What's a positive and negative of a mutation? All right, here's another one. Multiple allele types. So sometimes there's more than one allele type. It's not just like, oh, hey, you get option A or option B. Sometimes you can get quite a few. So for example, look at the rabbits there on the right. Rabbits aren't just one color or two colors. They can be multiple colors. You can have several different types, such as albino, chinchilla, dark gray, light gray, and even the Himalayan color. So very unique types of color codes out there. Another one that's more or close to home for you is your blood type. Okay, maybe you know your blood type, maybe you don't. If you do, that's a good thing. If you don't know your blood type, you can usually look at your birth certificate, or if you ever donate blood, they will usually tell you what type of blood you have. And that's useful information in life, just in case you get in an accident, you might want to know. All right, so look that up. But I'll show you some different types of blood types here, and you may be one of these, depending on your parents. So if you look here in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that you have different blood types, okay? You have blood type A, and then on the outside of that red blood cell, there are these things called